Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I play guitar on the streets. My acoustic guitar, a worn but beautiful instrument my grandfather left me, became my lifeline. Every day I'd set up at the same corner downtown, case open, hoping people would appreciate the music enough to drop in a few coins. The spot I chose was perfect, right outside a busy coffee shop where people had time to stop and listen. Over the months, I'd built up a small following of regulars who'd always smile and sometimes request songs. It wasn't much, but it paid for food and a tiny studio apartment across town. That Tuesday started like any other. I've been playing for about 2 hours, my case slowly filling with change and the occasional dollar bill. The afternoon crowd was just picking up when this woman approached with her son trailing behind her. She was dressed expensively. The kid looked to be around 8 years old, and his eyes lit up when he heard me playing. I gave him a friendly nod and even played a little louder, watching his face break into a grin. The woman interrupted my playing with a demanding tone that already made me nervous. She told me that her son loved my guitar and wanted to try it. I looked at the kid who was practically bouncing with excitement. I'm generally pretty easygoing, especially with children who showed genuine interest in music, so I agreed that he could strum a few chords as long as I supervised. I carefully handed over my guitar, showing the boy how to hold it properly, but within seconds, he was banging on it like it was a toy drum. My heart nearly stopped. I quickly but carefully took the guitar back, trying not to seem harsh, while explaining that it was a delicate instrument and I needed to treat it with care since it was how I made my living. The kid looked disappointed but understanding. That's when the woman's whole demeanor changed. Her face twisted into something ugly as she demanded to know why I had snatched the guitar from her son, claiming he was just playing. I explained that I hadn't snatched it and just needed to make sure it didn't get damaged since it was all I had. She insisted that I should let her son play it properly, bragging that he was a musical prodigy and deserved it more than some street beggar. The insult stung, but I kept my cool and said sorry, telling her I really needed to continue performing. I suggested maybe she could look into getting him his own guitar. She declared that I was being selfish and that her son deserved to play my guitar more than I did. Before I could react, she lunged forward and grabbed my guitar. I instinctively held on tight, and suddenly we were in a full tug of war right there on the sidewalk. I pleaded with her to stop, warning that she was going to break it, but she demanded that I give it to her son right now. People were starting to stare, forming a small circle around us. I was mortified but refused to let go of my grandfather's guitar, explaining that it was my instrument and I wasn't giving it to anyone. The woman was getting more aggressive by the second. In her fury, she kicked at my guitar case, sending coins and bills scattering across the pavement. Some passers-by started picking up the money, trying to help. The kid just stood there looking horrified, begging his mother to stop and saying she was embarrassing him. But she wasn't listening. That's when a couple of bystanders stepped in. An elderly man in a cardigan approached us and asked if everything was all right and what was going on. The woman immediately switched tactics, pointing at me dramatically and claiming that I had stolen her son's guitar and wouldn't give it back. My jaw dropped as I protested that it was completely false and explained that it was my guitar, that I performed there every day, and that this was how I made my living. The crowd was looking between us, trying to figure out what was really happening. Thankfully, the elderly man spoke up again, saying he had seen me there many times over the past few months and that it was definitely my guitar since he had watched me play it dozens of times. A woman in a business suit agreed, mentioning that she passed by every day on her lunch break, and I was always there with that same guitar. The woman was getting desperate and angrier, accusing everyone of conspiring against her and her son and claiming it was discrimination. The situation was spiraling out of control. Someone in the crowd must have called the police because within minutes, 2 officers showed up. When the officers asked what the problem was, I quickly explained what had happened, trying to stay calm and factual. When they turned to the woman, she launched into a wild story about how I had stolen her son's guitar and was a thief keeping what rightfully belonged to her child. One of the officers asked if she had any proof that the guitar belonged to her son, like a receipt or photos. She insisted she didn't need proof and that it was obvious. The officer corrected her, explaining that she actually did need proof if she was claiming someone stole her property. The kid, who had been quiet through most of this chaos, finally spoke up and begged his mother to leave, saying it wasn't theirs and everyone was staring. You could see the embarrassment and shame on his face. He knew his mother was wrong. The woman looked at her son, then back at the officers. She declared that it wasn't over as the officers prepared to let her go with a warning. That's when she made one final, desperate lunge for my guitar. The female officer was ready for her this time and announced that she was under arrest for attempted theft and disturbing the peace. The woman started screaming about police brutality as the handcuffs went on, threatening to sue everyone and claiming her husband was a lawyer. The officers led her away while she continued shouting threats and insults. The other officers stayed behind to make sure the kid was okay and to call someone to pick him up. The crowd gradually dispersed, with several people dropping extra money in my case and offering words of support. The elderly man patted my shoulder and told me not to let people like that discourage me, saying I had handled the situation with more grace than she deserved. As I packed up my guitar and counted the scattered money that had been rescued from the sidewalk, I felt sorry for that kid. Having a mother like that couldn't be easy for him. I never saw either of them again, but I heard from one of my regular listeners that the woman had been banned from several local businesses for similar outbursts. Apparently, this wasn't her first time causing a public scene over something that didn't belong to her. My guitar survived the encounter without a scratch, and I'm still out there playing every day. I moved to this consolidated county about 8 years ago for my job at the engineering firm. When I first bought my house, the city handled trash and yard waste pickup directly. It was efficient, reliable, and reasonably priced. They came twice a week, took pretty much anything you put out within reason, and the crews actually seemed to care about doing a good job. But then the local government decided to merge the city and county operations to save money and improve efficiency. What a joke that turned out to be. Instead of getting better service, we got stuck with a bloated bureaucracy that couldn't organize a one-car parade. The worst part was when they outsourced our trash and yard waste collection to private companies. Now we pay more money for half the service. Instead of 2 pickups per week, we get 1. The crews are lazier than ever, constantly looking for excuses not to pick up your stuff. They have all these ridiculous rules about bag weights, pile sizes, and branch lengths. And don't even get me started on the mess they leave behind when they actually do their job. The whole situation came to a head last summer when I decided to tackle some long overdue yard work. I had been putting off cutting down this dead oak tree in my backyard for months. The thing was starting to look dangerous, especially with storm season coming up. So over 2 weekends, I went to town on it with my chainsaw, plus trimmed back some overgrown shrubs and cleaned up fallen branches from the winter. I know their rules by heart at this point. Yard waste has to go in those expensive paper bags from the home improvement store. And nothing plastic, nothing reusable. The bags can't be too heavy even though they never specify what that means. Branches have to be cut down to under 4 feet or they won't touch them. The whole pile can't be wider than 10 feet, deeper than 5 feet, or higher than 5 feet. Bags have to be lined up no more than 3 feet from the branch pile. I followed every single rule to the letter. Well, almost. I cut all the bigger branches down to just under 4 feet. I filled 3 paper bags about halfway with leaves, small clippings, and twigs so they wouldn't be too heavy. The pile was maybe 9 feet and 4 inches long, only because some tiny twig ends were sticking out. It was about 3 feet high and 4 feet deep. The bags were lined up perfectly, exactly 2 feet from the pile. Tuesday was pickup day. I left for work that morning feeling pretty good about getting all that yard work done. When I got home that afternoon, everything was still sitting there. But there was a lovely little notice stuck to my front door. The notice was one of those pre-printed forms they use when they want to avoid doing their job. It said my pile exceeded the size limits and I had two options: pay a $250 oversized fee or reduce the pile by half to fit within their requirements. $250 for a pile that was maybe 4 inches too long because of some twigs smaller than toothpicks. I stood there staring at that notice for a good 5 minutes, getting madder by the second. These people were trying to extort me over 4 inches of tiny branches. That's when I decided they were going to get exactly what they asked for. I had Wednesday and Thursday off, so Wednesday morning I got up early and went to work. First, I got out my hedge trimmers and trimmed those twig ends back until the pile was exactly 9 feet long. But I didn't throw those trimmings away. I laid them right on top of the pile. Then I went to my backyard where I had a stack of branches I was saving for the following week's pickup. I found 4 long, straight pieces and stripped all the smaller branches and leaves off them. Each one was about 7 feet long and fairly straight. I measured out 1 foot intervals on each pole and marked them with bright orange paint. Then I drove them into the ground at my curb, making a perfect rectangle that was exactly 5 feet wide by 10 feet long. I had some surveyor's tape left over from when I had my property lines marked a few years back, so I tied that around the poles at exactly 5 feet high. Now I had a bright pink outline showing the exact dimensions their company required. Time to fill it up. I went back to my pile and started rearranging. To make everything fit perfectly within the boundaries, I had to stack it higher and tighter. That meant I needed more material. So I went to the backyard and brought up almost 2/3 of what I had been saving for next week. The pile was now 4.5 feet wide, 4.5 feet deep, and 9.5 feet long. Everything was under the height limit. Every single branch was cut to exactly 46 inches long, well under their 4-foot rule. I even included some small logs that were just under their 5-inch diameter limit. The pile was now almost twice the size it had been before. But I wasn't done. I took those 3 half-full bags back to the yard and filled them completely. Stuffed them with every leaf, twig, and small branch I could find. I even cut some of the larger branch ends into 8 to 10-inch pieces and added those for extra weight. The bags were so heavy I had to use my hand truck to get them to the curb. All that extra material filled up 2 more bags, bringing my total to 5, which, according to their rules, was the maximum allowed. When I was satisfied that everything was perfect, I went inside and called the company. I told them I needed to schedule a pickup for my yard waste since they hadn't come on Tuesday. They checked my address and mentioned the notice they had left about an oversized load. They said I would need to either pay the fee or reduce the pile size. I explained that I had actually reduced the pile to fit within their requirements and asked if they could send someone out to pick it up. They said they could send a truck, but warned me that if it was still oversized, I would have to pay the $250 fee. I told them to come on then, since I was confident it met their specifications. About an hour later, the same crew that normally covers my neighborhood pulled up. I was waiting for them with a big smile and my 25-foot tape measure. I greeted them and thanked them for coming back. Before they started, I asked if they could help me measure the poles to make sure everything was within the limits. The driver looked confused but got out his own tape measure. We measured the rectangle exactly 5 feet by 10 feet. We checked the height, everything was under 5 feet. We measured some of the longer pieces, all under 4 feet. The driver admitted that everything was within the limits. I thanked him for double checking and mentioned that I knew what 10 feet looked like. I pointed to my fence line where I had marked off 10 feet with orange electrical tape as a reference. What happened next was beautiful. These 2 guys who thought they could intimidate me into paying their bogus fee had to spend the next 2 hours manually loading every single branch and log onto their truck. The bags were so heavy it took both of them to lift each one. I stood there the whole time in my shorts and t-shirt, sipping ice-cold sports drinks and making cheerful conversation. I commented on what a hot day it was for that kind of work and mentioned how good it was that they were getting paid by the hour. I told them to take their time and not to rush. By the time they finished, both of them were drenched in sweat and completely exhausted. They barely managed to grunt a goodbye before driving off. No extra fee appeared on my bill, and ever since that day they've never left so much as a single leaf on the ground in front of my house after pickup. I worked hard and fast at everything I did. Whether it was school projects or part-time jobs in high school, I had this drive to get things done quickly and do them well. My parents always said I was too eager for my own good, but I figured that's what employers wanted. Someone who could deliver results fast and exceed expectations. When I started my engineering program in college, I was excited about the work-study setup. 6 months of classes, then 6 months of full-time work in my field. It seemed like the perfect way to get real experience while earning money for tuition. I had no idea what I was walking into when I accepted my first placement at an automotive parts supplier. The company made components for major car manufacturers, and from the outside it looked like a solid place to learn. The building was massive, with different departments handling everything from design to testing to quality control. I was assigned to the materials testing lab, which sounded right up my alley since I'd always been good with technical work. My first day should have been a red flag. The person who was supposed to train me had gone on medical leave that very week. No one told me this until I showed up and spent 3 hours sitting in the lobby waiting for someone who wasn't coming. Eventually, a manager found me and basically said I'd have to figure things out on my own. For the first few months, I did exactly that. I watched other technicians work, asked questions when I could, and slowly picked up the basics of material stress testing and quality analysis. It wasn't ideal, but I made it work. The other employees were nice enough, and I thought I was building a foundation for when my trainer came back and could properly show me the ropes. That never happened. My trainer's medical leave kept getting extended, and by the time my first semester ended, it was clear they weren't coming back anytime soon. The company didn't bother finding a replacement. When I returned for my second semester, everything changed overnight. The company had started merging with one of their biggest competitors, and apparently someone in upper management had decided our facility was redundant. The plan was to move all operations to the other company's headquarters about 30 miles away. I got reassigned to a different department, something called process validation, which dealt with testing manufacturing procedures. On paper, it sounded interesting. In reality, it became a disaster from day one because they'd already shipped most of our equipment to the new location. My new supervisor was a woman in her 60s who'd been with the company for decades. She seemed stressed about the merger and kept talking about how everything was being handled poorly. Our department was down to just 4 people, her, one senior technician, me, and another student who'd started the same semester I did. For 2 weeks, we literally had nothing to do. The supervisor would give us safety manuals to read or have us organize supply closets, but it was obvious make work. We'd finish these tasks in an hour and then sit around trying to look busy. I started bringing textbooks to study, figuring I might as well use the time productively. Finally, my supervisor came up with a real task for me. She needed someone to analyze a batch of component samples and write up a report on their structural integrity. It involved some measurements, calculations, and documentation, exactly the kind of work I've been hoping to do. I dove right in. The testing procedures were straightforward once I figured out how to operate the equipment, and the calculations were similar to problems we'd covered in my materials science class. I worked through lunch and stayed focused, finishing everything by mid-afternoon. When I knocked on my supervisor's office door to let her know I was done, I expected at least some acknowledgement that I completed my first real assignment successfully. I told her I had finished the component analysis she gave me that morning. She looked shocked and asked what I meant by finished, since that work was supposed to take me the entire week. I explained that I thought she just needed it done well, and that I had double-checked all my measurements and calculations. She got flustered and said she didn't have anything else for me to do right now. She worried about what she would tell the department head if he saw me sitting around with nothing to work on. I offered to help the other technician with his projects or start on something else. She quickly shut that down and told me that wasn't how things worked around here. She explained that next time she gave me an assignment, I needed to pace myself better and make it look like I was busy working on it for the full time she allocated. Otherwise, management would think they didn't need as many people in the department. I left that conversation feeling completely confused. In every job I'd had before, finishing tasks quickly was seen as a positive thing. Here, apparently, efficiency was a problem because it exposed how little work there actually was to go around. About a week later, my supervisor called me into her office with a new assignment. She explained that the company had thousands of small explosive devices used in airbag testing that needed to be disposed of properly. These things were apparently too volatile to just throw in the trash, so they had to be detonated in a controlled environment first. She told me I would be in charge of disposing of these safely. There was a reinforced concrete containment box in the back garage where I could detonate them. She reminded me about what we had talked about before and emphasized that I shouldn't rush through this project. She showed me to the garage, which was basically a separate building behind the main facility. The containment box was this massive concrete structure with thick walls and a small opening where you could insert the devices and trigger them remotely. The whole setup was designed to contain the small explosions safely. The supervisor explained the basic procedure: connect the devices to a detonator, clear the area, trigger the explosion from outside the garage, wait for the all clear, then repeat. She estimated there were probably 3,000 devices to get through. I asked how many I should try to do per day. She told me to just work at a steady pace and remember that we wanted to make sure I was following all safety protocols carefully. She said I shouldn't feel like I needed to rush. After she left, I examined the setup more carefully. The devices were tiny, about the size of a pencil eraser, and the detonation system could easily handle multiple units at once. I could probably wire up 20 or 30 at a time and work through the entire batch in a week or two if I really pushed myself. But then I remembered my supervisor's earlier lecture about pacing myself and looking busy. She'd made it clear that finishing work too quickly was actually a problem here, and this garage was perfect for taking my time. It was isolated from the main building. No one ever came back here during normal operations, and I had to follow safety protocols that required clearing the area during detonations anyway. So I developed a new approach. Instead of maximizing efficiency, I decided to maximize the time this project would take. I'd wire up maybe 5 devices at a time, set them off, then take a break to review safety procedures or inspect the containment system. Since I had to clear the area during each detonation anyway, no one could question why I was spending so much time away from the actual work. I had legitimate safety reasons for taking my time. I could spend 20 minutes carefully checking each connection, another 10 minutes ensuring the area was clear, then actually detonate the devices. After that, I'd wait another 15 minutes before going back in to inspect for any safety issues. In between these cycles, I had hours of downtime where I was technically working but couldn't be disturbed. I brought my phone, downloaded some games, caught up on shows I've been meaning to watch, and even started learning guitar using online tutorials. The company was paying me over double minimum wage to essentially have the most expensive phone time of my life. Whenever someone from another department asked if I could help with their projects, I politely explained that I was tied up with a critical safety disposal project and couldn't leave my assigned area. Most people just nodded and found someone else to help them. After all, who's going to argue with explosive device disposal taking priority? The system worked perfectly. I'd detonate maybe 30 devices per week, which seemed like a reasonable pace for someone being extra careful with dangerous materials. Meanwhile, I was probably having more fun than any other student employee in the building. My supervisor checked on me maybe once every 2 weeks, usually just poking her head into the garage and asking how things were going. I'd show her the documentation I was keeping of each batch disposed of, and she'd nod approvingly and tell me to keep up the good work. I would tell her I was still working through them steadily and wanted to make sure I was following all the safety protocols exactly. She would agree that it was better to be safe than sorry with this kind of thing. The other student in our department kept getting assigned random busy work around the facility, while I had my own private entertainment center in the back garage. I almost felt bad for him, but not bad enough to mention that my project could easily be completed much faster. When the weeks turned into months, I perfected my routine. I'd arrive each morning, spend about an hour actually working with the explosive devices, then settle in for a day of phone games, streaming videos, and online courses. I was probably getting more personal development done than actual work, but technically I was completing my assigned task at the pace my supervisor had requested. The semester was scheduled to end in late April, and by early February, I realized I could time the project to finish exactly when I needed to leave. It was almost like a math problem. If I had roughly 2,000 devices left and wanted to finish in 12 weeks, I needed to dispose of about 40 per week. Perfect! By this point, I'm pretty sure my supervisor had completely forgotten I existed. She seemed genuinely surprised whenever she saw me in the hallway, like she couldn't quite remember why I looked familiar. The other technician in our department had been reassigned to help with a facility move, and the other student had quit after getting tired of having nothing meaningful to do. In my final week, I made sure to finish the very last batch of explosive devices on my official last day. I documented everything properly, cleaned up the garage, and wrote a comprehensive safety report on the disposal process for whoever might need it in the future. Then I walked into my supervisor's office to let her know I was completed. I told her I wanted to let her know I had finished disposing of all the explosive devices and handed her my final safety report. She looked confused and asked if I had been working on that project this whole semester. I confirmed that yes, it was the airbag component disposal project she had assigned to me back in January. She seemed to suddenly remember and said it was good that I had completed it safely. Then she asked if I was coming back next semester. That was my opening. I handed her a formal letter I prepared and told her I had actually decided to pursue opportunities that would better utilize my time and skills. I thanked her and the company for the learning experience. I sent copies of the same letter to her boss and human resources. In the most professional language I could manage, I was essentially saying this place was a complete waste of my time and I wouldn't be returning. A few months later, I ran into some of the other student employees at a campus job fair. Turns out almost all of them had quit at the end of that semester too. The company's handling of the merger had been such a disaster that most of us decided we'd rather find new placements than risk coming back to more of the same chaos. I calculated that the company paid me over $10,000 that semester for what amounted to about 2 weeks of actual work. The rest of the time, I was essentially being paid premium wages to entertain myself while following their explicit instructions to work slowly and look busy. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.